Hello horror hounds, welcome to my horror house. Jaws is back at the cinemas. It's been re-released in IMAX and a 3D version is also screening. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but not one to look a gift horse in the mouth. On Friday I went to go and see Jaws in 3D. Jaws is, to my mind, the greatest film ever made. I am also a fan of 3D when it's done right. So I wanted to talk a little bit, not a review of Jaws, because there's nothing really original or interesting one can say about Jaws now, but I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience of seeing Jaws on the big screen and in 3D. It's the second time I've seen the film on the big screen. I saw it first, I think it was the 40th anniversary re-release, but that was at an art house cinema, so it was a relatively small big screen. This is by far and away the biggest screen I've ever seen my favourite movie on, and it was quite an experience. It was a new and fresh experience. It's amazing how I can keep seeing this film in fresh and different ways. The Blu-ray re-release was absolutely superb. The picture was so freaking clear. I was picking things out of this film I've seen so many times before for the first time, and here on the big screen and in 3D again, things I was noticing for the first time. But this was quite an overwhelming experience. The first time I've probably been overwhelmed by Jaws since the very first time I saw it as a kid, and it absolutely grabbed my imagination. But it felt different this time, not always necessarily better. Sometimes 3D works and sometimes 3D doesn't work for films. It works absolutely for Jurassic Park. It seems as if that film was shot for 3D in mind. Jaws, not so much. There are places and spaces in the film where the 3D works like absolute gangbusters. The 4th of July segment, absolutely. Any time you're in the water and you remember the shots and it sort of gets half filled with water, and sometimes the camera goes under a little bit and you're bobbing around. That feeling of the being surrounded by water is absolutely superb. Anytime the camera looks out across vast expanses of water, as it does quite often in Jaws, absolutely brilliant. When we're on the crow's nest of the orca, anytime the camera's looking down from the crow's nest down on the deck with the sea around it, absolutely superb. Other times the 3D really compresses what's going on in the frame. I'm going to struggle technically to try and explain what I mean, but the 3D conversion they did for this film does not feature really any popping out of the screen gags, not even really subtle ones, which I think is a shame because there are moments in the film that I think would warrant it. Instead, what the 3D gives us for the most part is some behind the screen stuff, adding depth to the field of vision behind the screen. And one of the strange and unexpected consequences of that is to make the film feel much more claustrophobic. And I don't know why it is. I'll give you a prime example. The scene where Brody and Sean is mimicking Brody, and it ends with "give us a kiss, why? Because I need it," just before Hooper turns up for the dinner party. And Ellen is in the background leaning against the kitchen door, watching them from a distance. For some reason in this 3D conversion, adding a depth to the field seems to bunch everyone in together. I really wish I could sort of technically explain it, but rather than seeming far away, she seems really close. It seems counterintuitive that adding depth to the picture sort of foreshortens everything, but it really does, and I don't know why that would be. It means that the very culmination of the film where the shark is coming towards Brody plays really, really weird because it seems like the shark is he's almost on top of him, so how can he get 4 or 5 shots off? It doesn't seem to make sense. Where that works is when we're on the Orca with Quint, Brody and Hooper. The Orca all of a sudden feels really claustrophobic. They do feel like they're all one on top of another. I will admit the effect was so weird that I was convinced while I was watching it that the picture had been cropped, and I made a mental note of a few frames and where items were placed in the frame so I could go back home. And as soon as I got back home, I put my Blu-ray on and took the film to those same shots to see if there was more picture which had been cropped out of what we were watching on screen. And I would have sworn blind that some of the picture had been cropped, and it absolutely had not. Seeing the film huge like that, this is going to sound stupid and obvious, but the close-ups are huge. I've never seen the faces that big before. Just watching the detail, just watching the actors act and react so large and full in the frame was absolutely glorious, because all the acting performances in Jaws, I think, are superb. Seeing it so large as well, things popped out at me that had never popped out before. Yet again, I'm finding different and new things in Jaws. Silly, inconsequential things perhaps, but for me, this film I love so much, finding that it still has ways that it can keep giving to me is just an absolute joy. For example, I'm a dog person. I've got a couple of dogs. I've kind of always had dogs in my life, and I hadn't quite realised how many dogs there are in Jaws. Jaws is full of dogs. The Brodies have got a dog. The Brody's dog is there with Ellen and Martin when they wake up in the morning. The Brody's dog is there on the sofa when Martin's going through that Book of Sharks, the wonderful, you want to get drunk and fool around line. The dog's sitting there. Quint's mate, who has no dialogue, has a dog. He's there present with the dog, at Quint's blackboard speech. But later on, when they go to Quint's base of operations, the dog is there again. There are loads of dogs in the background of beach shots. Pipit, obviously, rest in peace, Pipit. There are a couple of dogs on one of the boats when they're going out trying to get the bounty and chumming the water and throwing dynamite in the water to try and catch the shark. There's a boat there with a couple of dogs on it, and I was just going dog, 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 dog. How would it just pass me by that this film is chock full of dogs? The other tiny detail that I hadn't noticed before, but a brilliant character detail, is that when Matt comes to dinner, the wonderful scene I love with the way Roy Scheider plays it when he's pouring the wine and just fills an entire tumbler for himself, and then pours out a tiny measure for his wife and a tiny measure for Hooper. I hadn't noticed before, because on the telly it's just at the bottom part of your screen. No matter how decent a telly you've got and how large a screen you've got, it wasn't until I saw it huge like this that I realised that he hadn't finished what he had previously been drinking. Now I couldn't tell whether he was drinking some scotch in a rather large glass, or whether he'd gotten down to the bottom of a glass full of lager. But he's got a good 2-3 fingers of whatever he's drinking previously that he just tips half a bottle of red wine on top of and starts drinking. He's 3 sheets to the wind, and when he's drunk on board Hooper's boat, when they go out that night to look for the shark, and he's doing the whole, but on Amity one man can make a difference, and he wheels round and he's holding a bottle of wine. That's the bottle of white. Hooper brought red and white because he didn't know what they would be serving, so Brody more or less polishes off the entire bottle of red for himself and then takes the bottle of white with them. So he's completely shit-faced at that point. The other real consequence of seeing it so large, so that when something fills the frame that big, it's big, is that the shark looks freaking huge. And I know that's a stupid thing to say, but it's when you see it that big, you realise, holy shit, that thing is a monster. Mainly towards the end, especially the scene where the shot where the orca is sinking and the shark busts through the glass window to try and get at Brody. It's the bit where he puts the compressed air tank in the shark's mouth. Jesus, it's fucking huge. And then later on, when he's on the crow's nest stabbing down at the shark, and that glorious shot above him, and you see the shark beneath him. And this is going to sound really stupid, but I thought to myself, holy shit, that shark is fucking huge. I'd never seen it so big before. Not just, it was a consequence of it filling the frame when the frame was this big. And when the frame is this big and you've got your leads filling the frame, and Spielberg's a master of framing anyway, there was a sense of tension and claustrophobia in each frame that I'd never experienced before any other time I'd watched it. And I don't know if that is a consequence of seeing it on such a large screen, as a consequence of seeing it as a 3D presentation, or a bit of a mixture of the both. Now, if this is released on Blu-ray 3D, would I get it? Yes, I probably would get a 3D version for the sake of completeness. I would be interested to see how it plays on my home screen. Would it be the version I would go to? It would not. I think my default version would still be the superb Blu-ray release we got a few years ago, which I think is the best it has ever looked and sounded. So a little gimmicky, yes. Was the experience worth it? I mean, absolutely. It was seeing the film fresh again. I mean, it still plays. It plays like absolute gangbusters. It doesn't have an ounce of fat on it. Such a well-oiled roller coaster of a summer blockbuster. The performances top to bottom are fantastic. What a thrill, what a joy. So yeah, the 3D is a little gimmicky. In places it earns the effort to convert it into 3D. In other places I think it detracts from the experience of the film, but overall a unique experience of watching my absolute favourite film.
I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.